The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
Before we get going on any hockey topics today, a very belated happy birthday to one Chris Johnston. Happy birthday,
belated.
man.
You're only 10 hours late. It's not even that bad.
10 hours? I mean, by the time people get this podcast, it'll be a lot later than 10 hours.
Well,
happy birthday,
you,
buddy. I hope you got to enjoy your special day. Another year older, another year wiser. Couldn't think of a better person to get to enjoy their special day than you, of course.
Oh, that's sweet of you, man. Yeah, it was a good day. Very low key. You know, the birthdays as you get up there become a little less wild. No big parties or anything like that. But had two nice meals, great lunch and dinner.
Nice.
Obviously worked during the day, but yeah, feeling very grateful for another tour around the universe. And I'm gearing up for a half marathon this weekend, so I didn't want to do anything that would get in the way of that, i.e. there wasn't even a glass of wine drank. That's how committed I am to being in the whatever I'm going to end up being, the 50th percentile of men age 43 running the half marathon in Toronto on Sunday.
Red or white wine?
Red would be my preference normally, almost exclusively. I mean, I will have white wine, but red would be where I would normally. That's what I would have had with dinner last night in a world where there was no race this weekend. Okay,
well, that's a future gift idea from me. But yes, happy birthday. We had to start off the episode, at least by giving you that shout out. Also, another milestone, 2 milestones were set in Pittsburgh yesterday. Sidney Crosby reaching the 1,600 point plateau and Evgeny Malkin at 500 goals. Big milestones for future Hall of Fame players in Pittsburgh. Did you get to watch any of the goals, the plays? What'd you think of it?
Yeah, I saw the first period and the overtime of that game, which, there was a lot of chaos in between those two things. I know that happened. And, perhaps the best part is they didn't split the milestone. There was some thought, what happens if, Crosby's setting up Malkin's 500th goal and it's his 1,600th point? What do they do with the puck? Crosby did later say it would have went to Malkin because he knows 500 goals was so meaningful to his teammate, but ended up being academic because Sid got it on the first period goal by Brian Rust. And Malkin ultimately scored later in the game on a pass behind the back pass from Crosby. And, you're talking about monumental numbers now. I mean, 1,600 points. The last player to get there was 13 years ago. I believe it was Jaromir Jagr. It's only 10 players in NHL history that have ever climbed those kind of heights as Crosby has. Alex Ovechkin's not too far behind him, so we're probably not going to have to wait 1,300 years to see another player do it, or 13 years to see another player do it. But, we know what these guys have been in Pittsburgh. When you start to see the numbers and look at the history, I mean, everyone else was 1,600 points. We could give it the one name treatment, and you know who I'm talking about. The Gretzky, Howe, Jagr, Lemieux, kind of class, Sakic. So, that's the company that Sid is keeping. And, even Malkin, 500 goals used to be an automatic for the Hockey Hall of Fame. I mean, I think Malkin would have been in, if he stopped at 490, I'm sure he still would have been, we would be talking about him as a Hall of Famer, but that used to be a benchmark that pretty much guaranteed it. And so, pretty cool. They do it on the same night. Even more important for the Penguins trying to cling to whatever they have. They were part of a big comeback after, going behind Buffalo, coming back, taking a lead, losing that lead, but winning overtime on a Crosby goal. And Pittsburgh's 3-2 to start the year. I don't know that I believe in the program any more than I have. They're 3-2 with a minus goal differential, but they've won some games. So credit where it's due.
Hey, the goal differential is -1. If it was like -5 or 6, I'd be a lot more concerned at that. But you're right. You know what? Minus goal differentials, not necessarily what you want, but hey, a 3-2 start, second in the division right now, in the Metropolitan, the Pittsburgh Penguins. What have you thought of that start generally, but also their goaltending? I have to admit, I didn't know who Joe Blomqvist was before the season started, but he's played a role in the team's early success so far.
He has, and I think he's giving management something to think about here, because Alex Nedeljkovic has been injured to start the season. You'll recall he started 12 of 13 games down the stretch last year when they were making a run towards the playoffs, basically supplanted Tristan Jarry, who's better paid and was meant to be the number one goaltender last year. And lo and behold, here we are to the start this season, and there are some eyebrows being raised around the league, about Jarry in particular. I think it started right from their game 3. They were blown out on opening night by the Rangers with Jarry and net. They go to Blomqvist, who's a 22-year-old, making his first set of NHL appearances here. Certainly a well thought of prospect in the Penguins organization, but not one necessarily you were expecting to see playing NHL games now. But the injury situation has necessitated it. Blomqvist wins in Detroit in game 2, and they go to him on Saturday night in Toronto with the start. And already that suggests, obviously, that it's a bit of a jump ball for the goaltending position. He did lose in Toronto. They went to Montreal, and Jarry went in and won that game, although with a bunch of pucks going in. And, Jarry gets pulled after allowing 3 goals on 5 shots on Wednesday. That's a summation to basically say Tristan Jarry with over $5 million a year on the cap and the long-term deal is already in danger, I think, of losing his job. And I don't know that we're at the place where Penguins management, when Nedeljkovic gets healthy, and I should mention he is getting very close to being healthy enough to get back in the net. I'm not saying they're going to waive Tristan Jarry at this point, but it starts to become a conversation if his struggles continue, I think. And the good news for the Penguins is they appear to have a goaltender in Blomqvist who, certainly has a lot of promise, and he's showing well here. He's got 2 of the 3 wins now since playing some of these early games. I would imagine it's going to be Jarry Nedeljkovic when Nedeljkovic is healthy, but at some point here, if Jarry's play doesn't turn around, I think that Pittsburgh's staring down the barrel of sort of a Jack Campbell, Cal Peterson kind of situation where you've spent a lot of money on a goaltender, but I don't know how much longer they can be patient with him. I think certainly they can be patient beyond the second week of the NHL season, but that patience can't last forever. And so there's a lot of heat already on Tristan Jarry, even though we're 5 games into the season and he's already seen 1 start go to a rookie that it wouldn't have been his. And then he seeded the net on Wednesday by having a tough first period.
For sure. At least as a silver lining for Pittsburgh, seeing that a goaltender they drafted in the second round in 2020 has at least played decently to start his NHL career, that at least should bode well for their future in net.
It does, but there's cap implications to be considered too, right? It has to get pretty far before you're waiving someone. Look, in the last year, we saw Peterson waived a number of times, right? He was waived in LA. Obviously, Phillies waived him since he was traded there. Last season, it was Jack Campbell getting waived. Ilya Samsonov making over $3 million last year with the Leafs got waived in season. Teams do reach with at least some amount of regularity. Teams reach this point with goaltenders who have, significant money or term on their contracts. But, you're signing Tristan Jarry to the 5-year deal that they did soon after Kyle Dubas was hired because you believe he's going to be a rock for you. And the fact he lost his job last year and has started this year, you can only imagine his confidence has certainly been shaken. I know that, Mike Sullivan's trying to say the right things in the media. He's trying to calm things down. He's trying to keep things level. But I do think there's only so long that they can continue with that, especially in a year where, they are trying to make the playoffs. They're trying to, climb. I just don't think you can keep rolling him out there if he's a liability. And so just stay tuned here. I don't think this is an action item just yet, but this is a little more critical than I would have thought this early in the season, just because it really has been a rough first week. And I guess there's the other positive. It really has only been 8 days into the season that we're having this discussion. There's certainly lots of time for Tristan Jarry to play well enough to make us forget this even happened. But, if it keeps going in the wrong direction, I think the Penguins are going to be faced with a tough decision.
I didn't mean for this to turn into Penguins corner all of a sudden, but maybe we should touch on Rutger McGroarty getting sent down to the American Hockey League. Obviously, we talked about his situation in the offseason and the fact that he wanted out of the Winnipeg Jets organization. The Penguins get him. He starts the season on the roster, but now already 8 days in, as we've mentioned, he's already being sent down to the AHL. That's an interesting situation too.
It is, but I think it's as simple as wanting to get a young player minutes, right? And give him some situational experiences down in the American Hockey League that he's not getting now in the NHL. When he was in the Penguins lineup for those handful of games, he was a 3rd line player for them. I would expect you'll see him play a lot more minutes and get some 5-on-4 opportunities and things like that with Wilkes-Barre. And part of this is that Brian Rust was injured and has returned to the Penguins lineup. The other part is Jesse Puljujarvi has been a really under the radar good story for Pittsburgh. He came back last year and signed with the Penguins after having the same hip procedure as Patrick Kane had, the resurfacing surgery. You know, maybe never got back to any version of himself he was proud of. I actually had a chance to chat with him on the weekend, and he said he feels much, much, much better after, you know, just having more time to work out and, you know, start this year well. He showed really well in training camp. He's put up some points early in the season. You know, one of the comments I've heard is just he's skating so much better, which I think is a reflection of the positive aspects of his recovery from that hip surgery. So, you know, in some ways, it's not all bad news. I mean, I'm sure Rutger McGroarty would prefer to be in the NHL, but for his development, you know, I think they're taking a long-term view here, and let's see how long it lasts. I mean, if there's an injury, if some of the performance slips from whether it's Puljujarvi or someone else in the lineup, I'm sure you'll see McGroarty back in the NHL at some point soon. But, you know, I think there might be some misunderstanding about some of the circumstances that led to him wanting not to be in Winnipeg. You know, obviously, I don't think it's fair to say he and the Jets didn't have the same view of what was best for his path to the NHL, but I don't think it was ever he didn't want to play at all in the AHL. I think you know, there's a little more nuance involved there. So, you know, I don't anticipate this is going to be any kind of big picture issue for the Penguins and McGroarty. I think everyone's on the same page, and, you know, go down, get him some minutes, and I think we'll see him back in Pittsburgh at some point here in the near future.
Cool. Also, small thing with Jesse Puljujarvi, 1 goal, 3 points in 4 games for him this year. He had 4 points in 22 games last year with the Pittsburgh Penguins. That's just, if you need the statistical evidence that he's better than he was last year, there it is for you.
Yeah, and this is getting in the weeds a little bit, and I'm actually working on a story about this, but
please go in the weeds.
The hip resurfacing surgery used to be a career ender when players got it. You know, players like Carl Hagelin got it, Ed Jovanovski back in the day towards the end of his NHL career. And essentially when you had that surgery, it was kind of the beginning of the end. You know, it's sort of interesting now. You know, Patrick Kane had a pretty good year last year coming off that procedure, and I think he's feeling even better to start this year. You're seeing elements of it with Puljujarvi. John Klingberg's a player who's unsigned right now, but he had that procedure done in January, and I know he's working his way towards a comeback. And so, you know, there's a bit of a lifeline here. You know, Andy Murray, the tennis player, actually got this in his career and came back and played well. And so, you know, there's a positive story, big picture for guys who have hip troubles. And let's face it, it's more and more players now. I think the action of hockey, the way players move, obviously the intense training and the number of games they play, you know, you're seeing more and more players have hip related issues. And if this can be a surgery that offers a path to a second chance or a renaissance for these guys, I think it's a great story. So, you know, it's something I'll be watching. And, you know, Puljujarvi is a young man, right? I mean, he was drafted in 2016. He's not even 10 years past his draft. And so, you know, I think it's fair to say if he can get healthy, that there's going to be a good player in there. You know, maybe not the player he was once forecasted to be when he was taken 4th overall by Edmonton, but, you know, I think you have to adjust those projections over time. And, you know, he's offering hope, I'll put it that way, to those that maybe have hip issues, or a player like John Klingberg who's working his way back from them right now.
All right. Let's go from Pittsburgh to Colorado. I know we talked about them earlier this week in terms of their start, which at 0-3 at the time we were talking about them, you were already hovering your hand over the panic button considering what they were going through. They lose to Boston on Wednesday, 5-3 losers. Only four players on the Avs get points in that game. And of course, 3 of them are the main suspects in Rantanen, McKinnon, and Cale Makar. They're 0-4 now. What do you think of this team as they are right now? We know they're dealing with injuries, but this is not the start we expected from them.
It's not, but we also have to talk real here. I mean, they have $37 million of contracts and cap space sitting in the press box, and or unable to compete if they're not watching from the press box. The point is, you know, there's not a quick fix here. I mean, maybe the quickest fix would be trying to tighten up defensively, hoping for a few more saves. I mean, that might be in the short term, the best route back to them to get some wins, to ease the pressure, to try to get, you know, things along. But the reality, I just don't see an easy answer. This is not a front office that can make one move today that's going to make us feel significantly better about the roster or their positioning. You know, certainly we all love their start players. I mean, they've got a Hart Trophy winner, they've got a Norris Trophy winner, a Conn Smythe Trophy winner. They have everything on this team, but they don't have enough of it. And if you go and look at their lines, I mean, they just have players playing much higher in the lineup than you would expect for a team with big ambitions. And so, you know, they're trying to just do something to get through until the cavalry comes back, till everyone gets healthy, till they can infuse their lineup that way. And you know, it's it's far too soon to predict which way this is going to go. But I mean, it makes you start to think just with the DAC stacked against them and some of those realities. I mean, this could just be a year where it isn't quite their year, that they might have to reload a little bit and come back. I mean, I'm not saying the Avalanche aren't making the playoffs at this point. I think it'd be foolish to get too far ahead of ourselves. But I mean, your brain could start to go there. And, I'll point out too that the Avalanche don't own their 2025 draft pick. At least conditionally, it belongs to the Philadelphia Flyers. The only way the Avalanche would get to select with that pick is if it falls in the top 10. I'm not sure, even with the team as currently constructed, I'm not sure they're a bottom 10 team in the league. So, they're just in a tough spot. There's no way around it. I like the ownership you've seen, some of the top guys sort of calling themselves out or trying to take, not making any excuses, not looking at who isn't here, looking inside, where they can be better. But I mean, for this early in the season, they're certainly feeling it, because as I mentioned, I don't see I don't see one transaction, one thing that's going to change. They have to find a way with Georgiev being very leaky, with their defensive play not being where they'd like it. And they haven't been able to outscore their problems. I mean, that's maybe the biggest difference, say, between a Pittsburgh and a Colorado, is Pittsburgh, can give up 5 in a game like they did against Buffalo on Wednesday, but they scored 6. The Avalanche haven't been able to do that. And I think in part is, they're missing 3 or 4, certainly of their top 9 forwards, 3 of their top 6 forwards, in my estimation, in Lehkonen, Nichushkin, and Landeskog. And so, they're also down Jonathan Drouin. I mean, this is just no way around it. This is just a bit of a shit show to start the year. It'll be one of those ones where if they come back from it, they'll talk about how the adversity was good for them, right? This could be a rallying point, or maybe it's a sign that this just isn't their year because of how many things are stacked against them. But, I don't think they should be looking outside the walls for help. It's got to come from within.
I imagine if you're Jared Bednar right now, too, it definitely can't be easy for him going through all these injury issues.
No. And, it's a reminder of how close the league is, I think, too. I mean, we think of certain teams as absolute cup contenders. I think Colorado would have been on most lists, honestly. If before the 0-4 start, if we were doing tiers, they might have been in most people's top tier. They certainly would be no lower than the second tier in terms of, whatever you want to call that, but like cup contention or where they are in their window. And here they are at the bottom of the NHL standings after 8 days. I mean, it's a tough league right now. The margins aren't huge, but I think that bodes well for them too, because when they do find another gear, I mean, this is a team capable of ripping off 6 or 7 straight wins and erasing some of this early start. But they need to get to it quickly because time's a ticking.
I say they do find a way to rip off some wins, because we all know when Nathan MacKinnon gets going, he's one of the most fun players to watch, and he'll find a way to get that back. I mean, I don't like the 0-4 start. I'm not worried. Nor should anyone else be. Anyway.
I can't remember where he landed on the worry-o-meter, concern-o-meter, whatever. I'm getting to about a 7 out of 10. I'm getting to, just because of the $37 million in the press box and not a lot of returns coming in the next week. It's just a lot to overcome. I'm not saying they can't, but my worry-o-meter is pretty high based on what I've seen in the early going here.
We'll revisit this at American Thanksgiving for our annual tradition of teams where they're stacked.
We'll be revisiting it as soon as next week if they don't get some wins soon. I mean, this story it's like a snowball starting to roll downhill, and it's only going to get bigger and bigger if they're not able to reverse the tide a bit.
Let's do a Leafs corner really quickly here. Let's talk about Anthony Stolarz, who's been really good for the Toronto Maple Leafs. From our friend Jonas, a.k.a. Beanie Siegel. Anthony Stolarz has stopped 79 of his first 84 shots as a Leaf, a .940 save percentage through 3 starts. What have you thought of his play? Is he their long-term fix in net? Even if Joseph Woll comes back healthy, would you still keep Anthony Stolarz in net?
Well, I mean, he's certainly going to play. I would be still a little hesitant to overdo it workload-wise for Stolarz. And it's no discredit to where he started. I mean, it's as good as you could map it out pretty much for him to start the year, especially with Joseph Woll, a surprise, late scratch on the opening night. He hasn't yet played for the Leafs this year through their first 4 games. For him to step in and play 3 of 4 to get 2 out of 3 wins, and the one game he lost was a 1-0 loss. So, he's played well enough certainly to give the Leafs a great chance to win every game he started. That's all well and good. The reality is he's a big man. His previous high in the NHL is 27 games in a season. I would just be worried about the workload that you might be putting on the chassis there. If you're giving him north of 40 starts, if you're trying to think about making him the sort of 1A option and you're looking at 50, 55 starts, I mean, I just think it's a lot to ask of him to do that just because he's never done it, right? And we're not talking about a brand new player in the league. This is someone who's been around. I certainly expect, and I would have expected this no matter how the season went, that he's going to play more than those 27 games that represent his previous high water mark. But I can't immediately jump to he's starting 2/3 of the games from here on in. I think that the reality is the Leafs need Joseph Woll to get healthy. My understanding is there's a lot of optimism that he'll be back quite soon, ready to play in the lineup for the Leafs. And I think at that point, it'll depend on how well he plays, how well Stolarz continues to play. I think the Leafs will have a semi-open mind about, how the rotation goes, but I think it's going to be a rotation should both of those guys get healthy. So, tip of the cap, great start to the season for Stolarz, but let's not get too far carried away here, because if you get to a stage, last year he played one game in October for Florida. He was their backup. And the way the schedule went, he's already played 3 times. It's mid-October. The Leafs have, a game Saturday. They have games Monday, Tuesday, next week, back to back. There's a lot of games to be played here. And so whether it ends up being Joseph Woll coming back, or Dennis Hildeby, who won his only start so far, is actually the Leafs' number 4 goalie. I think the Leafs still consider Matt Murray their number 3, but he's coming back from that big hip surgery last year. They want him to get up and running in the AHL rather than backing up a bunch of games in the NHL. The Leafs are getting by kind of with their number 2 and number 4 to enter the season right now, and then we'll see where Joseph Woll lands. But the big picture story here in Toronto is this team is playing very well at 5-on-5. Defensively, they've not given up a lot. It's been helped by the goaltending. The guys are making the saves they should, not giving up ill-timed goals or what I call bad goals. And, early days, the same sort of caution we're putting on the stories that haven't started well. But this has been pretty much a dream start under a new head coach. And, I think particularly with the signings of Chris Tanev and Oliver Ekman-Larsson in the offseason, the Leafs are getting exactly what they want out of those players. The Leafs top 4 defensively has been vastly improved through 4 games than where they were last year. Those players in particular have performed well, which I think is it's a good news story, right? Look at the Leafs free agent signings of a year ago. What were we talking about? Ryan Reeves had a very tough first 10 games. He was something like minus 10 or 11 through 10 games. Yep. John Klingberg was in and out of the lineup already and was dealing with ultimately what led to that hip injury and hip surgery he had, but that wasn't going well. It's a totally different story now where the Leafs newcomers, Stolarz, Ekman-Larsson, Tanev in particular, have been really, really good to start the year. And, even someone like Steven Lorentz has been a nice addition on their 4th line, brought a lot of energy, scored a goal, throwing checks. It's just a different vibe than where they were at last October. And really the last couple Octobers, they struggled. So this has been an encouraging start in Toronto, and Stolarz has helped make it that way, but it's also the play in front of him that's helped too.
One other person we should mention who finally getting off to a decent start for themselves after yesterday's game anyway. Austin Matthews finally getting his first goal of the season. We got to mention him too.
We should. I will say I'll give Toronto credit for a change because we all like to hate on the media scene here, the fan scene. But, no one did seem to freak out too much by Austin Matthews having a 0-0-0 in the goal assist and points column across 3 games. Which is a good thing because anyone who's watched the last 8 years should probably give him the benefit of the doubt. And of course, he has a goal and 2 assists in his 4th game. Yes. I will remind you a couple years ago when he had a 60-goal season, he did go 0-0-0 through 3 games that year too, which is not to say that's the recipe to a 60-goal season, but it's only to point out that, we've seen this before. I don't think there's any concern about Austin's play. In fact, he had 8 shots on net on Saturday against Pittsburgh, didn't score, but the chances have been there. The Leafs have been absolutely dominant with his line on the ice at 5-on-5 to this point. Now he's got a few points on the board, and I imagine he'll continue to roll from here. I don't know. I think the 69 goal season of last year will be difficult to replicate, but certainly to say, for me, the floor for him is probably 50 goals this year. If he gets somewhere in the 50 to 60 range, I think that's probably where my expectation would lie. And, you might say he's only got 1 in 4 games. He's off pace, but just seen enough of the guy to know it's probably not a worry that he can score in bunches. And, the Toronto market, for once, maybe because the team has actually played pretty well and has been winning some games, didn't freak out about this one to the degree it might at other times in years gone by.
That's very true. Maybe if it had gotten to 10 games, but no.
Oh, yeah. I mean, 10 games, okay, that's an eighth of the season. Now you're getting to a meaningful sample. But, the other guy, too, that played excellent on Wednesday was William Nylander. Was on the ice for 5 of the 6 goals, had a direct hand in a couple of them. And, I mean, it's for a place where there's always some kind of controversy or storyline. It's been very quiet so far in Toronto. I mean, everything has gone well to this point. Again, though, it's 8 days. A lot happens in the league. There's a lot of ups and downs for every team, every organization, and I'm sure there'll be something here. There'll be some sort of chaos in Leafs Corner to come, but so far so good.
As long as we keep having Leafs Corners. Look, I get it. It's quiet. We need material for these segments. People like these segments. Be a lot better if we had stuff for this segment, even if it was just quiet. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's material. I mean, it's the Leafs are still missing Joseph Woll. I mean,
yes.
I just pointed out they've got 3 games in 4 days starting Saturday. I mean, if Woll isn't back, if the goaltending springs a leak, I mean, in 4 days from now, the whole picture might look a little different. But I'm just saying through the games they've played, based on what we've seen, based on what we can make judgments about, it's been a pretty solid start from top to bottom for the Leafs.
For sure. I want to get to the Utah Hockey Club. Again, we talked about them earlier this week. We bring them up again on Thursday. But I'm curious about their back end. Sean Durzi, it looks like he's going to be missing some time with an upper body injury. John Marino's been missing for a bit of time with another upper body injury. Does Utah, it's really early. I think 8 days might be the front runner for title of this episode already. But if you're the Utah Hockey Club, you have those 2 guys out. You have $8 million in cap space, according to Puckpedia. Do you make a move? Do you stand pat? Is there something that can be done with the space that's there? Are we just projecting? What are we thinking here?
Well, I think the first move you might see them make is look to their American Hockey League team to see if there's help there. I mean, keep in mind the Utah HC, formerly Arizona Coyotes, have made a lot of draft picks in recent years. They feel they have some depth, and so I think, they've put Robert Bertuzzo in the lineup, who is a veteran that, they signed off of a PTO in the wake of these injuries. I mean, they're not replacing Sean Durzi. We should say that right out the hop here. I mean, he's a first pairing guy for that team. And so he eats up a lot of minutes and plays important junctures of the game. But, I think that they're more inclined for the time being to look internally. It seems like Marino's still a fair way off. He missed training camp with his issue. Durzi was injured earlier in the week, and not a firm timeline yet on how long to expect him out. But I suppose if time goes along, maybe the internal options start to look a little less appealing, and you're looking externally. I mean, the trade market hasn't yet taken shape. I mean, we know that, for example, Timothy Liljegren with the Leafs, he's played 1 of the 4 games so far. No secret that the Leafs would be at least open to considering moving him to another team. I mean, but beyond that, it's hard for me to pinpoint a bunch of defensemen that they could go make a deal for that might be a bolster to what they're doing. And so, at this point, I think Utah goes to the farm maybe and makes a call up and tries to get through this patch that way. Lean on a veteran like Bortuzzo, who's played a lot of games in the league and hadn't been in their lineup when the season began. But, they're going to have to patch it together, I think, and before any types of moves are made. But again, if this is 2 weeks down the road and the team starts to leak oil, I mean, they allowed 5 goals in a loss in Anaheim on Wednesday, then they might have to rethink things. But right now, I think they're just going to get by with what they've got and, see where they end up if they can get through this little period here without 2 of their top D.
Okay. Anything you want me to bring up before we get to stick taps?
No, I don't think so. I can't remember. I got lost in the show. There's nothing on my mind though. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, no, it just this show's run by pretty quickly. So just wanted to make sure we cover all of our bases here before we get to our stick tap segment that we normally do on Thursdays, where we show some love throughout the league. Crosby and Malkin getting stick taps would be a very worthy mention for this segment, but we should we should go to Columbus in Florida from earlier this week. The tribute that they paid to Johnny Gaudreau. I watched some of the tribute earlier this week. I'm going to be thinking about this story for a long time. I know you've thought about this story a lot too, with Johnny Gaudreau and what their family has been going through. But seeing both teams wear the number 13 before the game, all the players wearing 13 on their jerseys, the opening face-off goes, they let 13 seconds elapse off the clock. They pass the puck over to the left-hand side where Johnny Gaudreau would have been. Just really, really touching. Sean Monahan scoring in that game too, pointing towards the banner raised at the arena for Johnny Gaudreau. Just, I'll say this. As sad as this tragedy is, it is unbearably sad. It's something that we're going to think about for a long time, and I can't imagine what this family is going through. I'm comforted at the fact that the hockey world has responded the way that they have for this situation, just offering their support to the Gaudreau family whenever, and not just teams. That's fans, that's players, that's everyone. Just seeing the tribute and seeing how people have responded in wake of this tragedy, that's at least a silver lining, a positive to take in. And I just wanted to say that Columbus and Florida came together to do a great job with their tribute earlier this week.
Yeah, the Blue Jackets really, they struck all the right notes with that. What really got me was seeing his parents on the ice, how emotional they were, understandably. Sean Monahan holding one of Johnny's kids during that ceremony. It's heartbreaking. It's hard to believe, honestly, for players on both sides that they had to go play a game after all that. But credit to everyone. I guess it's the same as you're saying with the family. What can you do? You band together, and you just got to keep moving forward. And it's not to say you're not looking back, but you're trying to do right by honoring the lives lost, celebrating the lives lost, and the joy and love they brought to your life. But it's a tough thing. And I think that, I can only imagine what the discussions must have been like about how do you honor this thing? How do you do it justice? I really can't imagine the Blue Jackets and also the Panthers as a visiting team doing a better job. I think that was a real testament to them on Tuesday night, and I'm sure the tributes won't stop here. We've seen them all around the league already, and I know there'll be other opportunities to do it the same. But that was the right one to do.
Columbus and Calgary haven't played each other yet, and they will in November. I think they play against each other twice within a span of a couple days. A bit of a home and home situation. Yeah, I in terms of tributes and tracking that, I'm circling those dates because I'm very curious to know how those will go in those cities.
Yeah, and it's tough to know what to do there because Calgary, as we mentioned on the show earlier this week, did a really nice job before their home opener on the weekend. Columbus has done this. I don't know what the right tone to strike is, later in the year when those the two teams, of course, that Johnny Gaudreau played for in the NHL meet. But, we, whatever it is, I'm sure they'll find the right thing, but it's tough to even know what to say in terms of words on a podcast like this. It's even tougher to put on, what amounts to kind of a show or presentation in front of 20,000 people and, nationally televised audiences. But, tip of the cap to what the Blue Jackets put together this week.
Yeah, I think that's good enough to have to represent for both of us for stick taps on this one.
Yeah, the other one I want to mention, it's really not a stick tap because it's a tragic story, but
of course,
want to give it some eyeballs in this part of the world in case you might have missed it. But I guess it's a tip of the cap to the Finnish Liga. Which had a moment of silence before every game played on Wednesday. And that's because a former player, Jani Puhakka, was murdered over the weekend, a suspected murder. Puhakka was the first openly gay male player to come out after his career. And he was, suspected to be murdered by his partner. And so that person has been apprehended by police, but obviously a very tragic situation. This is a player who played nationally for Finland internationally, won a bronze medal with the World Under 18 team in 2013, played in the QMJHL for Chicoutimi for a couple seasons, and then played professionally at home in Finland and also in France. And unfortunately died at the age of 29. So, tragic story. Obviously I don't have any personal, touch to that player, but, one that I know has felt throughout the hockey world and is making big headlines back in Finland. And obviously he's being honored there by the people that knew him and played with him as well.
Yeah, so we obviously send our best to his family and everyone else close to him. Yes. I am glad that we were able to mention that story. Actually, I know you wrote about it for The Athletic, so I'm really happy we were able to mention that too. And that'll do it for our Thursday show. Bit of a somber end, but these things happen these things happen, unfortunately. We'll be back next week. We'll have Ask CJ. We'll have more great content. Something will happen in the NHL, and we'll get to that. Subscribe to our podcast in the meantime. We'll talk to you all next week.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.